Hello, everyone. It's just occurred to me that this is 1 year of Zoom Research Forum seminars. So we've got our first anniversary of that. And a year ago, they were a real sort of lifeline, really, of keeping the community connected. And they've worked really well, allowing people to join us from all over the place, all over the world sometimes. I'm really pleased to welcome our colleague Rob Buckland, who's going to do our first talk of the third term. He's just told me that he's been a colleague at the RNCM for 24 years, which is quite a few, which is an achievement. So, Rob, I don't really need to introduce him at all, but because he's an international reputation as a saxophonist, soloist, an ensemble player, and is known for the Apollo and the Artwork quartets, as well as many other ensembles and many other ensembles. He's deputy head of chamber music, wind, brass, and percussion, and senior tutor in saxophone. He's had many commissions from leading composers, and I won't list them all. And he works with many other ensembles, such as the Michael Nyman Band, BBC Phil, Halley, the Liverpool Phil, and many jazz ensembles. He's got numerous CDs and recordings, and has managed to release one this month, so April 8th, I think, and it's called Just Because. So today, he's going to talk to us about his new album, his new CD. So please welcome Rob.
Thank you very much, everybody. Oh, look at that. That's a silent round of applause. I've just been watching the snooker on the telly, and they've got a live audience in with that. It looks like we might somehow or other be actually getting back to real people listening to things. It's going to be so amazing, isn't it? Well, thank you for coming along this afternoon. I've had a look at some of the other videos of things that happen along here, and there's all these amazing, very learned people talking about very important things. So I thought we'd go for something different this week and have me talking about making a saxophone recording, which I'm led to believe is called practice-based creative research. I'm learning slowly. I was thinking about this the other day when I started. Barbara said I've been at the RNCM for 24 years. Started on the 7th of May 1997, which I think is 24 years ago. I can't really tell. And in the June or July of that year, I hired the RNCM concert hall to make my first solo recording with my pianist partner Peter Lawson, who I've been working with for 25 years. And suddenly realised that here I am, all those years later, talking about what's my fifth solo recording that I've just released, and the sort of circularity of that whole process, and the idea that despite the fact that we evolve very much as musicians and as artists across our career, and many doors open to us, many doors close, and we take lots of different twists and turns in directions we didn't think we were going to go, there's a core ethos to who we are that I think sort of maintains right the way through that whole thing. And I was thinking about that first recording that I did, and the music that I wanted to release on that album was a statement to the world, as it very much is when you're in your 30s and you think you can do anything. That this is who I am. Here's my sound. These are the kind of musicians that I want to work with. This is the kind of music that I want to be involved with. And then here I am all those years later. I'm going to share a picture of some CDs so you've got something to look at other than my ugly mug. All those years later, still recording CDs with that same idea that I want to make an album that documents something about who I feel I am as a musician, what I think I sound like on the instrument, what my contribution is going to be to the repertoire, to the movement, to making a bit of a statement about how the instrument's changed and what I want to do with it. And all of those CDs over that time have been part of that mission. My role in this latest CD, I think, also became influenced by some of those experiences over those 24 years, in that I got quite frustrated quite early on as a musician that I would do hours and hours of practice, months of practice, years of commissioning pieces of music, months of practice, getting a recording together, doing a performance, going to the BBC and recording a broadcast, whatever it was you were doing, caring immensely about your sound and your technique and all these amazing things that all performers obsess about to the nth degree, hand that recording over to an engineer who you probably hadn't met and a producer you didn't know, wait 3 months and listen to it on the radio, and it would sound nothing like you thought it was going to sound. And somehow everything that you'd been working on was lost, and it had become a generic sort of standard recorded sound rather than conveying what it was that you wanted to say. And so when I did this first CD of mine back in 1997, I decided that I wanted to get a producer in so that I was in control of what was going on. And I've always tried to find a way to make this crazy thing we do as classical saxophone. I mean, I hate the term, but a classical saxophonist, well, a saxophonist playing classical music works better that way around. And trying to make that sort of interesting and acceptable and accessible to a general musical public who didn't need a degree in the saxophone to understand what was going on. That market's very much catered for. You can buy, I've got countless CDs behind me here of very academic saxophone performance. It's all about, look what I could do with my saxophone, listen to these extended techniques, listen to the saxophone, listen to the saxophone. And I wanted something that was more personal. So there were a couple of people I was working with at the time that I thought would be really interesting to involve in it. So Will Gregory, who was a great friend of mine, he was playing saxophone in Tears for Fears at the time, and then he ran a studio down in Bath, and his engineer was a guy called David Lord, who used to work with Van Morrison actually. And I'd always really liked the sounds he got on recordings. He did a recording for a group called London Saxophonic that I was part of that was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard on a recorded saxophone album. It was the first time I came back and listened to the album and thought, that's exactly what it sounded like in the studio. And so I got him to work my album. And so from the very, very my first forays into recording, I always wanted to have a connection with the people that were producing and reproducing what I was doing, so that it would document me in the way that I felt I sounded like. And then that's gone all the way through all of those recordings. Along the way, spent some really creative time in the early part of my career with John Harl, who was a big influence early on in my life. He produced the first couple of Apollo CDs that we did, including the first one that we did at Abbey Road Studio 2. We got a deal with Decca. Did a recording in there, and we had some great fun exploring all of the things you shouldn't be able to do when you're doing a recording, like standing in crazy positions and mics suspended in certain places. And so I've always had this sort of connection between the sound that I'm making and the sound that's being captured, and trying to put the two together. So, fast forward to this time last year when suddenly the world got switched off, and I sort of found myself sitting at home. You can sort of admit this now, and I've had this conversation with lots of colleagues where actually I quite enjoyed the first lockdown. I'd been working flat out for 35 years, running all over the planet, doing concerts and recordings, and the busier you get, the less time you spend practicing. You lose track of your own playing and what your sound's like, and we're always talking about, I wish I could have a bit of a sabbatical and a gap year and take some time to just go and do some practice again. And suddenly we were handed this opportunity, and I had a pile of music sitting on my desk that I'd been sort of playing on some concerts and things and not really got around to recording. And I thought, well, I'm going to take this time and sit in the studio and record myself and try and rediscover, after 25 years, what my core sound is. Have I still got that thing I think I had at the beginning? How has it evolved? What is it about my playing and my sound that works with certain composers and certain bits of repertoire, and how are those relationships kind of working, and how can I document those? How can I record those and set them up in the most attractive way? Basically as a practice idea. And initially, the first thing I was going to work on, which has become the title track of the CD, and Barbara was chatting about this just now before we came on with everybody, is the piece called Just Because, which was written by my great friend, and in recent years probably most most important musical collaborator, the jazz pianist Willem Simcock, who I'm sure a lot of you know through all sorts of crazy amazing project he's currently on. Would have been touring with Pat Metheny at the moment, which is ridiculous that I know someone that's touring with Pat Metheny. But anyway, and we've been doing all sorts of really creative projects. There's another one of the other projects I submitted for the ref, actually, for Barbara, was a project where we were working with some Debussy and Ravel, and then taking that, scoring it for string quartet, and me and Gwilym, and improvising over the top, which was going to be the album we were going to record this year, actually, until the world stopped. So Gwyl wrote me a piece. We've been doing some concerts, as I say, with strings and the two of us, and we wanted to do some solo spots in it, and we've both been doing some writing for the group. And Gwyl wrote me a solo piece for my 51st birthday 3 years ago, unannounced. I just went around for drinks, and he turned up and he went, "Oh, it's your birthday present." And he gave me a piece of music, and I said, "What's this for?" And he said, "Well, just because." And that's where the whole thing came from. There's nothing more highfalutin in it than that. It's just a mate writing something for his mate, which was lovely. It's a fantastic piece of music. I had to do a lot of practice to get anywhere near it. And as I say, I'd played it in a couple of concerts. Well, I'd blagged my way through it in a couple of concerts. And then suddenly the world stopped, and I had time to actually sit down. I thought, right, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to learn it properly. This is pushing my playing harder than I'd like to be pushed, and I need to do some work and try and figure it all out. So I have a studio at home here, and so I thought I'm going to try some different mouthpieces and different saxophones and different microphones, and I'm just going to keep playing with it until I get a really lovely recording that I can send to Gwyl 3 years late and say, "Here we go, mate, here's your piece." And that was how the project started off. And then before long, I'd sort of found another couple of bits and bobs lying around. Jenny Watson sent me a piece that she was about to publish just for me to check through, a piece called Downpour that made it onto the CD. And I played that through and I thought, oh, this is quite nice. I'll put that on the same pile. And there were a couple other bits and bobs started appearing. And then it became apparent that lockdown wasn't just going to be a 6-week holiday like Boris said it was, but it was going to drag on a bit longer. So I thought, well, again, I've got all this time now. Maybe I'll get on and finish some of the other sort of recording projects I thought that I'd been working on. And so suddenly there was a body of work appearing on my hard drive that started to look a bit like it might all hang together in some kind of way. And so the idea of an album started coming together in my head, more as a sense of, well, I've done it all anyway. And actually, if I keep doing it as a solo album, I don't need to involve anybody else. I have the studio, I have the mics, I have the saxophones, I've got most of the music, I can produce it, I can get that put out there, and I can achieve something in this little gap rather than just waiting until the world starts again. So there was no higher goal in it than that. Most of it happened by accident. So there's a 5-minute speed reading test coming up for all of you now. I've done a little video that's got a little 30-second excerpts of all of the 14 tracks on the album, with a little bit of text from each of the composers about the pieces. And I thought that would be more fun than me talking. So fingers crossed that this works. Here we go. There we go. So, and it sort of became apparent to me. I mean, we all know there's a fine line between, you know, insanity and genius, and sort of sitting here on my own. You know, I live alone here, sitting in recording goodness knows what hours of the night and morning, and then going back and re-recording and going back and re-recording and changing it and changing a ligature and changing a reed and having another go, and then putting a different microphone on. Gradually, the sort of piece, everything's, when I was listening to it back, there seemed to be a sort of relationship between all of the pieces of music, even though they all came about in a very unplanned way. And when you listen to the CD all the way through, if anyone can stay awake that long, there's a sort of a, I don't know, there's a sort of a commonality to the language and the sound and the atmosphere. And it seemed to me that there was a narrative coming through, and that's something I've always looked for in my playing. I don't have one of those prodigious techniques that so many of my sort of really advanced students have now, where they're flying around the instruments doing all these crazy things. I make an all right sort of noise, and that's kind of been what I've centered my career on, as having a sound that when you hear the track start, you know it's me playing it, not somebody else. and and also that resonated with me actually with the premise of the other big research involvement I've had at the RNCM, which was my book, my Playing the Saxophone book. I wrote a book, well, you can guess what it's about. The title is fairly obvious, but the whole thing centers around, oh, it's always the one slide you can't find when you want it, isn't it? Here we go, this thing here. It centers around the premise that, and I use this in my teaching all the time, as my students who bothered to turn up will testify to, the idea that you can do an awful lot of things on one note. And there's a little table of information that we use when we're thinking about this, where, you know, if you take one note in a piece of music, I think you're doing at least all of these things on that one note. You know, how does it start? What kind of beginning has it got? What kind of accent? What kind of articulation? What's going on in the middle of the sound in terms of the vowel superimposition and the frequency and the shape of the waveform and all this sort of stuff? Where does it crescendo and diminuendo? How does it finish? Where does that fit in the bar, the phrase, the section, the movement, the piece? All that kind of stuff. And that came about, again, through my sort of obsession and fascination with the recorded sound and working as a producer and looking at the transients that you see when you're working in Logic or Pro Tools, whatever you're working in. You see that visualization of what sound is like. And so, kind of looking all the way through the album, I could see that there was a commonality in all of that as well. So the idea of the narrative and the stories sort of fired up the subtitle to the disc, which is, you know, short stories for solo saxophone, with the idea that they sort of flow into each other and they all inform each other in some way. And then the back end of the album, as you heard from that little sampler there, the last 5 tracks are my own compositions, which I found a real challenge to know whether to include on the album or not, because, you know, you've got such amazing composers on there. You know, you saw the list of people, and then there's my little pieces that I sort of wrote that I do in concerts, and I couldn't kind of find a way to fit them in. And then suddenly the idea of completing a set of all 5 movements rather than just having 1 or 2 came to fruition, and it seemed to balance quite nicely with the whole project. So it sort of came about, I guess, by accident, but I also think that when we're thinking creatively, there's part of our brain that's always whirring away, working on our creative projects all the time. I'm sure, I mean, this is a Zoom full of very creative people. If you have a conversation that says, I'm thinking about working on a saxophone album in March last year, your brain is then thinking about that pretty much constantly until it's finished. It's just working on it in the background. And that's why I think we all get a little bit freaked out and stressed out sometimes when we've got too much going on. So that's the sort of story behind the album. What I also thought might be fun to do today is to share just a couple of the Logic files from my pieces, just to give you a bit of an insight into how I created some of the extra saxophonic noises rather than just normal saxophone noises as some of the backings to some of my pieces. So we'll do some of that for a bit, and then we'll open up the floor for some questions. Let's do, what's a good one with lots of funny noises? That's a good one. Let's do this one. We'll go off-piste. So this is going to be the baritone multi-track. The premise of the 5 pieces was that I would take a solo saxophone and then create a backing track that was only generated using that solo saxophone. So here we go. Hopefully you can see and hear this, and I just need to check I've got the audio on the right thing. Otherwise, no, I haven't. You'll be able to hear it. Let's wait for the spinning wheel of doom. This is the problem with Zoom and audio software. Right, here we go. So hopefully you'll be able to hear this. So let's make that look a bit better. Sorry, this is where I need someone to run all the audio video for me. Oh, behave. There we go. this is what my world's looked like for the last 12 months. Okay, so underpinning, let's take the reverb off to make it sound less glamorous. There's all sorts of baritone nonsense going on down here. Let's see what that sounds like. Is that making any kind of noise? So they're all the sort of things that if you spent any time in a room with a baritone and no one listening, that you sort of discover that you can make some really wonderful kind of overtone, wonderful noises, which when you put them in a nice reverb and a bit of delay start to sound quite atmospheric. But also, inevitably, if you start playing lots of saxophones for a while, the kind of lack of really rhythmic impetus becomes, for me, a little bit draining. So here's some other things that we did. I did. Here we go. That's on 8. Here we go. So this is how it all begins. So with kind of key clicks and noises on the instrument, you can start setting up a rhythm pattern. And then if you get really quite creative with that, you can start introducing an awful lot more of those things. Let's see what these noises are all doing over here. Which in isolation ought to sound a bit bizarre, but when we put them all together, just pop your reverbs back on. And then the other one that gets quite entertaining is, here we go, just to push this to the masses. Here we go, it's just opening up. The track for tenor saxophone uses a kind of beatboxing tenor saxophone technique. You could loosely call it beatboxing, but again using the saxophone in a percussive way rather than a saxophonic way. So where does all the fun start? Oh yeah, here we go. So this is quite fun. Yeah, that's what I want to do. So if you play the lowest note on the tenor, sorry, you're not sharing, Rob. Oh, I was doing so well with the sharing. That one, there we go. Is that coming through? And then if you whack that through a decent EQ, you can take all the top off and it starts to sound like a bass drum. And then we can add slightly more rhythmic G clicks, and then sort of beatboxing stuff like this. So with some rather unsophisticated, but I'd like to say subtly used ideas, you can frame the instrument in a way that makes it much more interesting. And certainly the first of those pieces that I wrote, Altogenesis, which I've played live for the last 10 years, probably it's the oldest piece. It gets a really interesting reaction from the audience, especially after just listening to acoustic saxophone for a while, if you can start showing kind of different colours and things like the instrument. So there's 5 of those at the end. There's a soprano, alto, tenor, baritone and sopranino multi-track pieces, just to set the instrument up in a different light. It's been a really interesting journey putting this CD together. I mean, most musicians I know suffer with various degrees of crippling self-doubt and imposter syndrome, and to some degree or other, the fact that we get to go out and play concerts 2 or 3 times a week and people come up to us and go, "Well done, that was lovely, would you like a pint?" at the end of it, so it kind of offsets that for a while. But when you sit on your own for a year and you've only got yourself to listen to, and you play something and you come back and you go, "Does that sound any good or not? I just don't know. Maybe I'll do it again. I'll go back and change that." And you start to go, frankly, a little bit mad. So at the end of what I thought would be 3 months lockdown and something fun to do turned into almost 9 months of obsessing about myself, and kind of coming to terms with, had I actually captured everything I wanted to capture? And then you get into that wormhole that all the students go through, where they're searching for perfection all the time, which of course doesn't exist. And then you eventually get to the point where I got to last month, where I just frankly just needed to release it so that it let my brain rest. And so it's out there. People seem to like it so far. I haven't had any refunds yet, which has been brilliant. It was great to reconnect with some composers who I haven't spoken to for a while. I phoned Sally Beamish up out of the blue and just had a chat and said, "Don't suppose you've written any music for solo instrument that's never been recorded?" And she said, "Actually, I wrote a piece for saxophone once and the saxophone player couldn't do it, so I made a clarinet version of it, which is published, but it would be lovely to have a saxophone version." And so that became a piece on the album. Gary Carpenter, our dear friend Gary, did a lovely flute piece and did the same thing with that. So all of the pieces suddenly come together. It felt like a really lovely use of my year. I'm incredibly proud of it. It's nice to be a month on the other side of it and the world hasn't ended after release, because it gets a bit mad, all of that stuff. So that's my project. That's what I've been doing. It's all available. You can buy it through my website. All of the music's published. All of my pieces are published. I even did some pretty little covers where I did some doodles of the saxophone on it, which I quite like as well. But eventually I just needed to stop mucking about and do some work. So that's the project. That's Just Because, short stories for solo saxophone. I hope that wasn't too rambly. I just sort of thought I'd see where it goes. Do hit me with any questions or any thoughts. I haven't also said the big word. I was going to say my big word and I forgot my big word. Muriel said that what I was doing here was autoethnography, which apparently means doing something and talk. I don't know. I can't remember what she said. I glazed over after that, frankly. But anyway, I got it in, so you owe me a pint. That's the end of my shockingly badly prepared presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rob. It's really interesting to get an insight into your year with the various lockdowns and how that the impact that has on our performing artists. And certainly, we'll come to questions in a second. But what's really striking is what you've said. You've talked about you as a soloist having time for the first time because of the busyness that we all experience. But you as a collaborator, these people writing pieces for you or giving you pieces to perform. And also the reason why I thought of the Just So stories of Kipling, because you talk about it being short stories, so that's where the just because and the just so somehow in my head had made a connection. But you as storyteller, which I guess as performers and musicians we are in various ways, and also you as a composer, all those elements are in there. So I'd like to throw it open to questions, and we'll this is a fun part, and our colleagues around the table are excellent at doing that. If those people who are listening on YouTube would like to ask a question, then please send your question to research@rncm.ac.uk, and hopefully Tom will keep an eye on that and feed in any questions. So if you can use putting the hand up, although I think I've got most of you on my screen here, and you can use the chat, and I'll do my best to keep up with it. I'm sure Rob will be looking as well. So we're going to start with Michelle.
Oh. Sorry, it's slightly noisy. I'm just going to a quieter space. Thanks, Rob. That was fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And it's that video that you've made of all the different tracks is brilliant. I mean, massive congratulations. It's such an achievement, isn't it? It's such a difficult year, and it sounds incredible.
Thank you very much.
And it's great. It's great to have this chance to hear about it. Mike, what I was going to ask is kind of the obvious one, I suppose, because it's something we've spoken about before, but I find it so fascinating that you think so carefully about your sound and what that is, and I know that you look at that with using, you look at the frequency spectrums, don't you? And I always find it amazing when we do the acoustics class, because the saxophone students who come along, and Kezia's here, they always know about harmonics and frequency spectrums, and they get that much more than I think. They think about it more than other students and other principal study disciplines. And I just wondered, what is your sound? Do you ever kind of reverse engineer what your sound is? And what is it? Is it timbre? Is it attack? Is it everything? If you could kind of talk about what your sound is acoustically, is that how you think about it?
Crikey, that's a big question. I don't know. I mean, it's not like I can look at it on a screen and recognize my sound visually, but I have, it's been really interesting in looking at some of the reviews that are coming in from friends and colleagues and people that have heard it that have just said, instantly, it's Rob playing the saxophone. It's that kind of thing that I'm looking for. I kind of think if you know what that is, maybe it takes the magic away. I don't know. Maybe it's also. I don't know if I can do this while I'm talking to you. Oh no, middle-aged man multitasking's not going well. Blah, 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 blah. That's the one I wanted. There's a lovely bit of software that we use when we're recording. It was designed as an auto-tune thing. It's the reason the Spice Girls exist, because if it wasn't for this, they wouldn't. Or you shouldn't say that on YouTube, should you? Too late. Right, here we go. So if I take Andy Scott wrote a really lovely piece of music that's on the CD. It's called Always There, and he wrote. We've been mates for 35 years, and he wrote a poem. Just arrived when I told him I was thinking about doing the album. He wrote a poem about my relationship with my daughters, because our kids are the same age, they grew up together, know each other, and he's always he's seen my relationship with my kids and stuff, and he wrote, it's called Always There. It's about how I was always there for my kids and all that stuff, which is lovely. I mean, it's a great deal to me. And so there's all these, and he's written a whole set of verses, and then there is a series of notes, and you play the notes whilst reading the words. It's like John Coltrane did it with the Lord's Prayer back in the day. And that really started the whole narrative thing off for me. So the whole idea that you're not just playing notes, you're actually trying to communicate something. And then if I look at the last bit of that phrase on here, so if I run that through this software, it's so detailed and it's in its listening that you can see the vibrato you do on every single note, and you can see through that note, which is, I don't know, 15 seconds, that there's something happening all the way through it, rather than playing a note and it holding on. And it's been looking at that sort of thing for goodness knows how many years that I've been doing it now, that genuinely when I'm playing the saxophone now, that's what I'm seeing. I see that as a sound that comes out of my instrument and it goes over the audience, so that the audience see the waveform with all the vibrato in and all the things that I'm doing, because you can hear it longer than you've played it because of the reverb. And so I'm consciously trying to shape that as I put something into the sound, and in being in the now all the way through every single one note that I'm playing, so that you're present at any one moment in it, not just I've played that note and I'm thinking about the next one. And again, we talk to the saxes a lot about that, about being, obviously you have to think ahead all the time, but the duality is you have to be very present in what you're playing. And you hear a lot of players who are so busy thinking about what they're doing that you're listening to them not thinking about what they're playing. And so that's kind of temporal thing has been very interesting. And you go back and you listen to a take and you go, that I really like that take. I feel like I'm connected to the music here. And I listen to take 2 and I don't feel like I'm connected to the music. And you can sort of compare the two audio, and I mean, I don't know, maybe there's something in it. It's all, I mean, I don't think we ever really want to understand everything about music. That's the whole point of music, is that you can't explain it, isn't it, really? Otherwise the magic goes. But I think we're getting closer. Does that answer the question? I said some words. It was good.
Absolutely. I think it's just fascinating, totally fascinating. Thank you.
It's interesting, Rob, that you've obviously had a lot of time for reflection and introspection, but actually it's still really hard to pin down in words the sort of distinctiveness of something like one's own sound. And we'll get to the autoethnography in a little bit, but first of all, I think Jane Ginsburg has had an interesting comment in the chat, where do you want to say that, Jane?
Well, I was just going to say that there's a program called Pratt, which is used for PRAAT, that's used to visualize and analyze the acoustic characteristics of voices. Now, if you, without working with it, I would recognize my own voice from the sound if I heard it amongst 30 other voices. But I wouldn't recognize it from the visualization unless I spent a lot of time working with Pratt, and then I would be able to recognize different voices from the visualizations. I want to pick you up, Rob, on something you've said a couple of times about not wanting to lose the magic. And I just want to put the other perspective, the psychologist's perspective, is that what we actually try to do is to demystify. And it doesn't demystify music. It doesn't stop the magic. In some ways, it is even more magical if you can get at the processes by which the music has been created or has been made. So I don't expect musicians to do that demystification, but we as music psychologists would be out of a job if we didn't look at the processes that underlie, and it's not just creativity, but expressivity, absolute pitch, synesthesia, memorization, all of the things that go towards making music magical for the listener. We try to develop methods for exploring. And I promise you, it doesn't make listening to the music any less magical. In some ways, it makes it even more magical.
Absolutely. But at the other end of that, I had a conversation with the wonderful Susie Stonefield, who's the administrator for wind brass percussion at the college, and has been at the college. Well, when I was a student, she'd been working there for a couple of years, a long, long time. And Tim Renish was the head of wind brass and percussion at the time. And Susie doesn't come from a musical background; she's not musically trained, and she tells this lovely story where she said she asked Tim one day, she was going and sitting and listening to the wind orchestra concerts that he was conducting and trying to join in and feeling like she couldn't get into our world. And she said to Tim, "Will you show me how to listen to music properly?" And he said, "No, I don't want to spoil it for you." And she said it was the best thing that had ever happened, because she said she comes to all of our concerts, and we all come off, all the musicians in here will now be nodding, because you come off stage and someone like Susie comes up and goes, "Oh, well done, that was lovely," and you go, "Oh, it was terrible, it was really, that was I didn't do that, and that I could, and you're just full of all the things that you did wrong, whereas the audience have had a lovely time. And actually, I do worry that once you can unpick the whole thing, then
Listen, I totally agree with Tim's response, and it is absolutely the response that I would give as a performer. I wouldn't want to interfere with I would say to any audience member, I don't want to interfere with your appreciation of the music, but heaven alone knows, people really, many people really enjoy learning about music. They do get more out of it. This is why people run music appreciation courses. It's why they listen to people talking on Radio 3. We don't all want to listen with innocent ears.
Yeah,
but people have got to be allowed to have innocent ears. I think that's enough of me. I shall shut up and listen to other people for a little while. Thank you, Rob.
Innocent ears. Alex is waving his hand.
Sorry, Jack's had his hand up for some time, but I do have Alex on my list, and at some point I'll respond to something that Jane said, but let's go over to Jack.
Thanks, Barbara. Thanks, Rob, for a really amazing talk. It was really fascinating to hear your processes behind all this and great music. I just wanted some advice, really, basically. I've done a lot of recording myself over the years in various forms and various guises, and still am, but I tentatively have been able to start planning my first proper album recording, which is happening next year, part of the kind of conclusion of my research studies. And I'm just really intrigued by you had this experience, you said at the very beginning of your time at the RNCM, working with a producer because you wanted to be able to have this control and the extra pair of ears. And now you've gone through this whole process of really quite detailed processing yourself and working it all out and putting it all together. And I imagine that you're probably maybe a bit too close to it still to be able to give a real full reflection on how it was. But I'm just intrigued in how you felt these two situations differed, and what you would advise to someone starting out in this world going forward.
Well, I mean, just because we didn't really have a lot of time at the beginning, I started off using those producers. I've been through all sorts of other recording and production experiences in my life. I've done a lot of production with a fantastic producer called, sadly no longer with us, John Heisman, who was the drummer in Paraphernalia and married to Barbara Thompson, famous jazz saxophonist. I did loads of work with him for about 10 years. It's where I learnt most of my studio craft. And I now work, probably a big chunk of my time, probably a quarter of my time professionally is spent working as a producer these days. I've done 4 commercial CDs this year for other people, jazz albums. And there's a lovely album I've just finished working on with Emma McPhillamy, one of our recent IAD graduates, and Jenny Watson, who was one of my students from 10 years ago, who wrote all the music. For this fantastic album that's coming out in about 3 weeks' time, I think. So yeah, I started off as a hobbyist, and it now and gradually, you learn a little bit more from everybody else, and you gain the confidence to maybe co-produce one of your albums, or at least be there at the end and just, would you mind if we did that? And then getting your elbows out and sitting in the big chair at the front, and then to the point now where actually it would have been useful in this process. Looking back, it would have been very useful to share some of my recordings with someone else and invite them in a co-production role to get some perspective. The one thing I lost was perspective, and which is why I allowed myself time to get away from something. So if I'd recorded a track in October, I wouldn't make any decisions on it till December, because if you're right on top of it, all you can hear are, as a performer, all you can hear are the thoughts that were going through your head in every second that you were playing it, most of them about, oh, I wish I could do that again. and you can hear all the wrongness and the thing that does that sound like that. Do I sound like that? Could I have done it better? So many times I went back. I must have recorded. There are 4 or 5 tracks on the album. I bet I've got 10 finished recordings of. And eventually I went back to the less perfect ones, but the ones that had more of a sense of performance and reality, and they're a bit more out of tune. There are a few mistakes in them. There are things that are just a bit ugly, but actually that informs who I am as a player as much as going for, you know, I could make an absolutely perfect, 100% in tune, flawless production job of it, but it's not real. And I wanted to retain a bit of that reality in it as well. So those kind of perspectives were challenging. I did go a little bit crazy sometimes in it, and had to give myself a bit of a talking to and go for a long walk and then not do any work on it for a couple of weeks and come back again. Because I got really, particularly in the darker days of the lockdown through the winter, when, you know, you get 5 hours of light and all you're doing is listening to yourself and looking at a screen and not getting out of the house. Seriously, it became quite damaging. And then you start to doubt what you even sound like anymore. I also went through crazy stuff. I mean, there's a pile of saxophones behind me here just in case I needed them, but I've got a couple of sopranos, I've got 3 or 4 altos, I've got different, God knows how many mouthpieces and ligatures and reeds. I've also got half a dozen very high quality microphones that all do different things. And I've genuinely started off with every combination of like this soprano with this reed, and this soprano with this reed, and that ligature, and that mic, and then with that mic, and then the mic over there, and record the whole thing, and then listen back to it to try and understand which was the best combination to sound like me, and then transplant that across to the other pieces. So it got a bit silly at one point.
Amazing. I guess time is both a luxury and a menace sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Thanks, that's really helpful.
Great. Can we have Adam, followed by Alex, and then Gavin?
Thanks, Barbara. Rob, it's a great talk. Thank you. And the album sounds absolutely terrific. Really fantastic. And I'm kind of fascinated that you did it at home. And I know you have a lot of equipment and tons of expertise. But the reverb on the thing, the sound is really extraordinary. And I'm just wondering.
That's where I did it.
Right, you see, in a tiny room. This is amazing. And
my garage. It used to be the garage, and now it's a studio. And then well, I'm sitting in the one where the keyboard is. I'm sitting there now talking to you on that computer. That's my that's the kind of production room. Yeah, but it's basically a garage, and with lots of acoustic treatment in it to get rid of any reflections. It's basically a dead sound. I use it for commercial stuff, really, and it's not an ideal place to play solo instrumental music, because it's and this is what all my I feel so sorry for the students. They spent a year playing in their bedrooms, in halls or whatever. God, you get down about your sound, because the closer you get to a saxophone, all you hear is the mechanics, which is a reed going bang, 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 and lots of air and lots of spit and lots of high frequency. You hear no resonance at all, because the part of your sound is the acoustic. I mean, you picked up on that. So then suddenly you take these recordings and put them in an artificial acoustic, and you go, oh, that's my sound. I sound all right again now. So that was a massive part of it as well.
So do you think the recording studio is dead for everyone except for large orchestras and pianists that don't have 150 grand Steinways in their houses?
No. I absolutely don't. We love a recording studio, and they all have their purpose. I mean, it would have been the best place in the world to record the saxophone is the RNCM concert hall. And when I did my first CD in there, as I said, we made some interesting discoveries, like the acoustic centre of the RNCM concert hall is not in the middle. You know, my engineer, David Lord, the Van Morrison's engineer, went and he set all the stereo pair up, and he went, it's all lopsided, and we tilted it one because the organ offsets it, and it's all slightly off to one angle. So, you know, those that fascinates me. But I would have loved to have played in there, because if you play into an acoustic, you play the instrument differently.
Mm.
You can't play quietly in a small space. I did a wonderful thing. This is relevant. I'll make it short. I did a wonderful thing with Salford University when I just finished college, and they booked me to go into their anechoic chamber. And they've got this massive thing with like huge foam cones and sheep stuck to the ceiling. It was woolly things everywhere. And you sit in the middle of it on a foam chair and play your instrument, and there's no sound at all. And they were recording it to try and look at sampling a saxophone to make it sound real, because saxophone samples always sound terrible. And all you can hear the only resonant space in it is inside of your mouth where the reed is vibrating inside you. So when you play a saxophone, which we know what the saxophone sounds like, it goes and it just makes this horrible high frequency buzzing noise inside your head, and nothing else is coming out at all. And that was a real eye-opener for me. It was like, well, by the time it's got to the saxophone, it's too late. If I haven't done anything to it by the time it gets there, I'm at the mercy of the manufacturer and the reed and all that stuff, and I don't want to do that. I want to make sure I've fixed it before it goes in there. And that was a life-changing moment for me. Did that answer that? I have no idea.
Yeah, I think it's makes it even more of an incredible achievement. And of course, Larry did a recording in lockdown as well, which was various people recording inside different houses and then coming together and managing to make an album that also I think just sounds fantastic. Yeah. So it's amazing the expertise that goes into this stuff.
Yeah, well, the bonus for me actually was that I could go back into the studio space sometimes 3 months later. I mean, Sally Beamish's piece, this is a classic case. She sent the music through to me. I transposed it out for the saxophone because it was for A clarinet and I couldn't transpose up a whatever it is. And played it all the way through and sent her a recording of it, and she was away on doing something, and about 3-4 months went by and she came back and got back and said, it's really good, but there's 4 wrong notes in it. And I was like, oh, are you sure? I went away through and I said, I'm really sorry, but I can't see where they are. And then she said, oh, we've just discovered that the published version for the clarinet has got 4 wrong notes in it. So it's like, oh, but I did that 3 months ago on, I don't know what saxophone and mouthpiece or where the mic was or anything now. I've got to go back and re-record those notes or re-record those bars. But to go back into the same acoustic and blend the sound in was much easier because there were less variables because it's completely dead. So actually, when I know where they are, I can hear them, but hopefully no one else can. But that's this consistency thing for recording, you know. Madness. I have some very expensive reverbs. That's the answer.
Before going on to Alex, there's comments from Jack and Sarah basically saying that recording studios are not redundant in any way. And Sarah's comment. Sarah, do you want to say what you've put here?
Hi Rob, love your stuff. It's just amazing. Yeah, for me, my home studio, it's not even a home studio, it's a couple of mics on a stand, has been like survival because it's kept me playing and it's kept me producing stuff and it's made me kind of get stuff out there. So for me, it's been survival. But when I've got back in halls recently and nice rooms, it's like luxury. So give me a studio any day. And my tech knowledge is awful, so I really am surviving.
But again, you know, you can sit in Symphony Hall in Birmingham and play a solo bass clarinet, contrabass clarinet recital and sound amazing. But when that comes out on CD, it might not sound amazing if it hasn't been recorded and produced and captured properly. Mm-hmm. And yet you can sit in a garage like mine and you can put a reverb on it properly and it sounds like it was recorded in Symphony Hall. So the two things actually, you know, there's not a given. Just because you're in a great acoustic doesn't mean it's going to make a great recording.
No, it's great. I mean, I've been doing stuff and sending it off to composers or, you know, asking people to help me, and I can send something that sounds pretty average sound-wise, but I know it's on decent stereo mics, and send it off and it comes back and it sounds pretty good. So
yeah.
There's ways of working, I think.
Can we hear from Alex?
Hi Rob, I've really enjoyed that. Thank you so much. I think a lot of what I was going to ask, I think got sort of answered in the discourse between sort of you and Adam, which was great. But sort of a little bit of a kind of a follow-on from that. I wonder whether kind of working in your kind of home acoustic, do you find at some points that sort of subconsciously alters how you might kind of approach stuff? And the other thing I was going to ask is, have you ever sort of experimented with a bit like sort of Led Zeppelin with sort of plonking John Bonham in the middle of a really sort of echoey sort of stairwell? You know, have you ever kind of played around with that to kind of do anything? And just sort of a follow on with what maybe sort of what I thought was really interesting was the point that sort of you made about Tim and the one that Jane was making I think they're both really interesting because at one point you've got, you know, a better level of understanding of something can help you appreciate it in some way and you get more out of it. But also, I don't know whether you think this or anyone else does, but, you know, if I had a magic lamp and I had 3 wishes, one of those wishes would be to go back to 1800 without any of the benefit of hindsight or musical training with it and listen to Beethoven's First Symphony for the first time, just for those opening chords without any of that sort of preconceived, you know, to kind of go back to, oh, wow, that is a bit of a shock, because nowadays that's completely different, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Imagine that, hearing something for the first time. It'd be incredible, wouldn't it? I mean, that's part of what I wanted the CD to do, actually, was as soon as each track starts. I mean, I have the advantage that most of our repertoire is unknown, so, you know, unless you go and look for it, you don't know it's there. But the first time you hear something, it makes you go, ooh, and you go off to that, you know. And I think most musicians do have an immediate response to something. So I don't know if that's in there or not. The thing about experimenting with crazy reverbs, oh my goodness, yes, some of the things that you can get up to electronically are, you have to really sort of gaffer tape your hands behind your back, because, you know, where do you stop, actually?
Yeah.
I wanted this to sound real. I wanted to sound like I'd recorded it in the Wigmore Hall. That's what I was going for. So yeah, but in my private collection of recordings, I have a couple of things in there that will never see the light of day that are quite extravagant, shall we say.
Amazing.
Wonderful recording by a great friend of mine, a jazz saxophone player, composer called Tim Garland. And he's done an album called If the Sea Replied, or something like that. I can't remember what it's called. And he's recorded, he plays the bass clarinet inside a lighthouse on the south coast of England. I can't remember, it was a big lighthouse, and he just stands in the bottom and he's just playing massive kind of chordal improvisations on the bass clarinet. And he just put a stereo pair of microphones at the top. And it's the most extraordinary thing you've ever heard. So
wow. Right, yeah, I'll have a look at that.
The way that, you know, the chord, you get like a whoa, and the bottom note rings for 2 minutes, so you can stack all the chords on top of it. It's an incredible noise.
Amazing. Thank you.
Great. Gavin, you've been waiting for a long time, so it's your turn.
Thanks, Barbara. Hi, Rob.
Hey, how you doing?
Brilliant to hear that CD. And we've heard a bit about, well, not a bit, a fair amount about the playing, the performance, and the recording techniques. And what struck me was the different character of all the pieces you've got on that CD from all those different composers. And I'm just wondering about your own compositions that there were 5 or 6 that you mentioned. And I was just wondering about some of the processes. For example, in Tenacity, we saw that there were multi-tracks. And I'm just wondering if that was how you produced those. Was it improvisation which led to composition, or did you just start at one layer and then just freely improvise and layer things up? Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. They all came about in different ways. I'll do them really quickly. Altogenesis, which was the first one, I wanted to do a piece in a concert using loop pedals, and every time I did loop pedals, it went wrong. And so I wrote something that sounded like it was loop pedals. So I play a 2-bar riff, click the pedal, that carries on, you do another thing and layer it on it. And that piece was simply just layering things up and taking them down again. Very straightforward, very improvisatory. I didn't even write it down, I just played it and that became a piece, and then notated it afterwards. Tenacity was a commission for the Tenor Saxophone Collective at the Strasbourg Congress. So it was written for 12 tenor saxophones, so the whole thing was notated from start to finish. And then when I decided to make this version of it, I rescored some of the backing parts, just recorded all of those, extended, there's a big solo section in the middle with some improvisation in it, and then put the beatboxing thing on the bottom, so that became expanded out. Balanza, the baritone one, I wanted to write something that was slow and lyrical and beautiful and haunting on the top of the baritone. I like the top of the baritone sound. You know, you get used to that honking thing. It's been overdone. So I was trying to find ways to frame that, and then some of the multiphonics. There's a saxophone player called Colin Stetson who does loads of circular breathing on a bass saxophone and all sorts of weird kind of and very ambient electronic-y stuff. Quite extreme, and he has a microphone strapped to his neck and sings at the same time, so you get chords and stuff. I mean, it's very physical.
Seen it. it looks quite scary when you see it being performed.
He goes to the gym a lot, and I think he could just about, but he's not going to be able to do it for long till he needs to lie down. But he wrote the soundtrack for a fantastic film that I watched. I think it was on Amazon Prime. It was called First. It was about the first manned mission to Mars or something. And the whole soundtrack was bass saxophone and electronics, and I was really influenced by that kind of overtone stuff that was in there. So I just laid down loads and loads of random stuff of that, and then picked all the bits I liked and put them together in a production kind of way, and that became the bed that piece was on. And then the key clicks for the rhythms references some of the other pieces. I wanted them to all have a commonality, so they all feel like a family. Carolino, the sopranino piece, I just sort of happened in about an hour. I was just sitting mucking about with it, and then before I knew I'd written it, I kind of found a little riff and played it, and then it was done. Sometimes it works like that. And then the soprano one took forever. I wrote like 4 complete soprano pieces before I found the one that I wanted. And that was in the last lockdown, and it was like, I've got to write a piece of music. It's the last thing that's stopping me producing the album. Where do I get my inspiration from? Because all I've seen is Zoom, my very small garden, and Zoom and my very small garden for a year. And what do I write? And so I had to go kind of into imagination, and I was thinking about every January the 1st for the last 7 years, I've been out to Amsterdam to go to the Netherlands Wind Ensemble concert at the Concertgebouw that they do every year, because we have a platform partnership with the RNCM with them, and I oversee that. So I get up at 5 a.m. on New Year's Day, get on a plane, whiz over to Amsterdam, and then I get a train and go, and just that something about going along in the train and all those. I like Holland because everything lines up. There's lots of straight lines, and the trees are all, and the canals and everything. So when you're looking out the window at like sort of 6 in the morning as the sun's coming up through the mist, you get that strobing thing in the train. And I was thinking I always really enjoyed that slightly hungover train journey I have every year, going to a beautiful concert. And then I was thinking about that train thing and Steve Reich and a bit of Meredith Monk, kind of repetitive, that kind of thing, and making some kind of train noises on the soprano, and then that got the kind of energy level going, and then I wrote the tune that went on the top. But I kind of had to go into the old imagination banks there for that one. So they were all kind of different, but they all have, like it said in that little note, that I wanted them to be like stories of 5 people set on the same day in the same place, so they all like walk past each other in the streets of their stories without realizing they're part of the background narrative. So there's little themes that appear and little ideas that just crop into 2 or 3 of them that link them all together.
Thanks. Do you think this is an album that you might tour as a solo raconteur and performer?
When I started off writing it, all I was thinking was, well, I can send it to some saxophone geeky friends and they'll listen to it once and throw it away. But now that I've got it finished, I actually genuinely think it will work as a performance, and I've started contacting some people and I want to do it in interesting places, like in an art gallery or something, so the audience can move about and look at different pictures and use the music to inspire different connections and things, and have that kind of stuff going on, rather than everyone sitting down watching me playing the saxophone for 40 minutes, which is a challenge for anybody. But yeah, I would love to do it. I would love to take it and do it as a one-man show, and just talk about the music and the stories, and let people talk about what it makes them think about when they're listening to it. I think it would be very interesting.
It would be great.
Maybe college will give me a gig one day, if there's ever any gigs at college. Who knows? Plug.
I wanted to ask Mario if she wanted to say something tiny about the autoethnography and how Rob might see this work in those terms. But I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but just a few thoughts.
I like this. It's funny.
Oh no, this has massively backfired. I only said it because I thought the researchers, they love this word. They'll lap it up.
It's good. It's down.
No, it was well, just sort of, we briefly texted a little bit. I warned him that I would be here today, and we briefly texted a little bit about how it came about, and sort of, it sounded to me like autoethnography. So I said, throw it in, throw in the word.
Then I forgot.
You didn't.
No, exactly. I'm not sure that deserves a pint. I'll get you a half.
Half.
If you'd have woven it in seamlessly.
Sorry. It was written right at the top of my thing, but I scrolled past it and then it was all gone.
Anyway, no worries, and I'm sure it definitely is a relevant term for what Rob has been is doing, but we won't press him anymore on that. I just wanted to come back a tiny bit on something that Jane had said about how music psychology is sort of demystifies, and I would suggest that it's not just a prerogative of music psychologists, although it was wonderful to hear what you said, and speaking as a musicologist and with colleagues who are analysts and also practice people who identify as practice as researchers, we all try to find ways to understand and to capture the magic, not to lose it in any way. But there's many different ways of doing that, and some people enjoy doing that, and other people don't. And of course, that's absolutely fine, as we were saying before. Although I might give Tim I don't know. I'm not sure. I might challenge him a little bit, Tim Rinish, on that response to that colleague. Jack and Jane have both. We've got allusions to ice houses in Dalkeith Park near Edinburgh, and also the Berlioz Requiem, about how it was more enjoyable for the audience and for those who were in the offstage. But the offstage performers.
I just want to add to that. A friend of mine was listening there, and she said it was one of her favourite pieces, but she couldn't hear anything, and it was really quite disappointing. It was. I don't know if anyone knows roughly what Cologne Cathedral is like, but it is huge. There's no other way of putting it. It's huge. And it was just the maddest thing in the world trying to play this music in there. But the whole thing's on YouTube now, and somehow the magicians with the sound recording made it work. It sounds great. I don't know how they do it, but they do it.
I did a gig in which is not the Wigwam, the cathedral in Liverpool. You know, there's the two cathedrals. Not the Wigwam one, the other one. The Anglican one, and that's like Cologne. It's like you walk inside and it's bigger inside than it is outside. I don't know how they do it. It's absolutely, and we did one of those sort of cream classical things in there, like full on dance kind of, and in an empty cathedral. And the guys that did the sound have been in there for 3 days rigging the sound system, and it sounded amazing in the venue. I don't know how they did it. It had lots of little tiny speakers all around and up and it sounded incredible. So it can be done.
That particular space reminds me. I did Tallis 40 Part Motetas. I performed in that in the Anglican Cathedral. Also, Holst Planet, where we're hiding behind pillars with the off stage stuff, and Allegri Miserere doing one of the solos in that place, where when you haven't actually got many people, but the sound of a building like that is incredible.
You should try this Beminalium in the Martello Tower in Aldborough. It's like the Whispering Gallery. You can't hear the person next to you. You can only hear the person on the other side of the thing. That was one of the most amusing performances of that piece that I ever did. But it's quite right, room acoustics are a wonderful thing. I used to work with somebody at Southampton University who could create different acoustics. So you could actually record in an anechoic chamber, and then he would make it sound like St. Peter's at Rome, or the La Scala, or the Purcell room, whatever you wanted it. He'd had them all digitally. But it's much more fun to go and play in these different places.
Yeah. I mean, you can do that now. I have the those reverbs Adam was asking about. You can do everything from a shoebox to named cathedrals of the world with 20-second echoes. Just stick this, it's great fun.
Just to follow on from the discussion around the mention of autoethnography, Jane is reminding us that she has a chapter in her very recently published textbook on performing music research is devoted to autoethnography. So that's one for everyone to look up. And Jack has made a comment. Larry and Ensemble Plus can tell us much more about virtual acoustics at some point. That's absolutely true. And Larry had to leave because he was on the school pickup. So he's sadly is not here. I think, unless anyone's burning to ask a question, I think we should probably draw it to a close. And I didn't mention that one of the things on my notes, Rob, that I missed out is that you have contributed to both the last two refs and most recently with the Apollo Artwork two quartets collide and merge, and it's brilliant to have our performers very much part of that research effort, and to have dialogue with our colleagues here at the RNCM. So thank you for a really thoughtful and thoughtful account of how this recording came about, and giving us quite a vivid insight into the life of a musician, you under lockdown, and how you responded to that in creative ways. And it's been a really fascinating afternoon, and thank you. Thank you. And please come back and listen to some of the other Research Forum seminars. There'll be most weeks this term, so please do join us. Thank you very much, Rob.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for coming, everybody.
Bye-bye. See you next week.